Do you remember Nick Fury from the early years of the MCU? He was strong, intelligent, capable, a guy that did what needed to be done and didn't put up with any nonsense. This series focuses entirely on Nick Fury, except all of those good things that I just mentioned are completely missing, because in this series, Nick Fury has been reduced to a weak and worthless shell of his former self. This character destruction is a trend with current year MCU, because the writers feel the need to dismantle and emasculate all the strong male characters. This happened with Thor, it happened with Doctor Strange, it happened with Ant-Man, and now it's happening to Nick Fury as well. So if you're going into this series hoping to see Nick Fury kicking ass and taking names, then you're going to be sorely disappointed. This series is another great opportunity to watch the Disney Marvel Universe continue its downward spiral into failure. Secret Invasion is bad, Episode 1. We open with this British dude who's appeared in some of the other MCU films, though I can't quite remember what his name was. I think it was Watson, Dr. Watson, I presume. Regardless, he goes into a building and meets with a crazy guy who I think works for S.H.I.E.L.D. or some other agency. The crazy guy claims that many of the recent worldwide attacks were actually caused by an alien race known as the Skrull. Now, I don't know exactly why the show is trying to portray this guy as being crazy and blaming stuff on aliens, because, yeah, in the real world that might be a little bit weird, but here in the MCU, alien attacks on Earth happen every other week. I mean, a big purple alien wiped out half the life on the planet, so I think pretty much everyone on Earth is well aware of the existence of aliens at this point. So I don't know why they went with the whole alien conspiracy nut thing, because it just doesn't work in this setting. Regardless, after watching Dr. Watson for about 10 seconds, it was incredibly obvious that he was just a Skrull pretending to be Watson, and he was most likely here to see if the crazy guy actually had any useful information that needed to be dealt with. At the end of the conversation, the crazy guy attacks, and we're led to believe that he's just attacking because he's crazy, and Watson is forced to kill him, and he does so by shooting him. He then leaves the building, and he notices that he's being followed as he's walking around. He starts running through the city, into buildings, and eventually onto a roof. Watson then decides to jump from one building onto another, but he misses and falls to his death.
This is where you fall down.
I want you to keep in mind as we continue through this series that the Skrull are going to be portrayed as being incredibly intelligent and masters of manipulation. And we have to assume that this Watson guy is not just your run-of-the-mill dumbass, because he was sent on what I assume is a very important mission to confront the crazy guy. So then why is it that when he is running away from his pursuer, he completely forgets that he had a firearm?
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
Now, when they're in a crowded area, it probably wouldn't be a good idea for him to use it. However, the entire chase scene shows them moving through secluded areas where there isn't another person anywhere to be found, especially when they're on the rooftop. This guy had just used his firearm to take out the crazy guy, and yet he completely forgets it exists when he is being chased by someone.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
But trust me, it's going to get even dumber as we continue through the episode and learn more about the Skrull and their abilities, because then we'll be able to look back at this particular incident with Watson and say, why didn't he just do this instead? But we'll cover that when we get to those moments. Regardless, Watson continues running on the roof. He jumps over to the other building, but he doesn't quite make it. He falls and he dies. Then we have the big reveal that he was very obviously a Skrull. Now, he's just stupid, which is why he didn't use the firearm. But there's also a very good reason why he didn't use any of his Skrull powers, and that's because the show was trying to have that big reveal. Like, oh, wow, he's actually a Skrull. Because if he had used any of his Skrull powers when he was running away, we would have been able to figure it out, and it would have been even more obvious that he was a Skrull. So the show creators were trying to create that big reveal, but as I said, it didn't work because it only took me about 10 seconds to figure out that he was a Skrull. So this just doesn't work on a whole bunch of levels. And speaking of things that don't really work, now we get to the intro.
No! Oh!
No, please, God, no! The entire intro for this series was created by AI, and to be fair, it does have a little bit of that weirdness that you might want to associate and would somewhat fit with the strange feeling of the shape-shifting Skrulls, but it also has the unavoidable artificial look to it that is always present with any computer-generated AI imagery. And while some AI imagery can look pretty decent, that's not really the case here, because a lot of it is either just kind of okay, or then you have stuff like this, which is just terrible.
It's just sad. It's just sad and pathetic.
Now you might be asking, wait a minute, doesn't Disney have a ton of animators in their studios? I mean, that is one of the big things that Disney has always been known for, animating, right? So why don't they use the animators to make a proper intro? Because using AI is way cheaper. That's pretty much it. It's a hell of a lot cheaper to use terrible AI imagery, and Disney can just cut some corners, save a few dollars, and that's about it. That's why they went with the AI imagery, just to save some money.
Fucking terrible.
After the intro, we see Nick Fury returning to Earth. Previously, he had been on the space station called Saber, which was being built in order to protect Earth. For some reason, Nick Fury isn't wearing his eye patch anymore. I don't know if this is being done because Samuel Jackson simply didn't feel like losing half of his eyesight whenever he was filming, or if there's a specific story reason behind it. If I would have to guess, after watching this first episode, because they're turning him into a weak and pathetic shell of himself, that maybe when he finally rediscovers the motivations that he needs in order to become stronger, he's going to put the eye patch back on and become the old Nick Fury.
No spoilers. They ruin everything.
Nick Fury is picked up by Maria Hill and Talos, who's one of the Skrulls. We get a quick synopsis of the situation currently going on. The Skrulls had landed on Earth many years ago. S.H.I.E.L.D. promised to help them find a new planet, but then Thanos used the Infinity Stones and wiped away half the life in the universe and caused a lot of problems. So the plan to find the Skrull a new planet had been significantly delayed. Some of the Skrulls, who are good, like Talos, want to continue trying to find a new planet, and some of the bad Skrulls just want to get rid of the humans and take over the Earth. Because there's such a small number of Skrulls that are currently on Earth, the bad ones are using a plan of creating conflicts between the humans so that the humans will effectively destroy themselves. The next big plan that they have is supposed to be the final one, which will use a nuclear weapon and cause an all-out war which will destroy all of the humans. It's believed that the bad Skrulls are also hiding in one of the abandoned nuclear power plants somewhere in Russia, because Skrulls are naturally immune to almost all radiation, so it's a good place for them to hide and not be discovered. After hearing all this, Nick Fury gets up and decides that he wants to go for a walk in the middle of the night in Moscow, Russia. He very quickly gets snatched off the street by a couple of agents who turn out to be working for the British government. He's brought back to meet with a woman named Sonia, who works for MI6, which is the British super-secret spy agency. Once there, the two start having a casual conversation, and Nick Fury manages to plant a not-so-hidden camera in her office. I can't even begin to explain how fucking stupid this is. Yes, Nick Fury is supposed to be one of the greatest spies of all time, and yes, we're dealing with some futuristic technology that exists within the Marvel Universe. But Sonia is a super spy that works for MI6. You're telling me that Nick Fury would be able to just plant a camera in the middle of her office and she wouldn't know about it? You don't think that she would have taken protective steps to stop that sort of thing? This is fucking absurd.
You thought I wouldn't notice this, huh? I gotta say, I'm kinda hurt.
Regardless, Sonia quickly says that Nick Fury doesn't seem like his old self and that he's changed, that he's a much weaker version because of what Thanos did, and that Nick Fury has lost his will to fight because now he views everything as being hopeless. This is the second time that this has happened in this episode already, because when he first got back, Talos told him the same thing. And this is going to happen again and again throughout this entire episode.
You're a man when I tell you you're a man.
Nick Fury says that he wants to work with her in order to stop the bad Skrulls. However, she says that she doesn't want to because he's weak now and he's no longer worth working with. She gives the example that her men were able to very easily capture him without him knowing, and Nick Fury responds saying that he allowed those men to capture him specifically so that he would be brought here and they could have this meeting, but for whatever reason she doesn't believe it, even though it is incredibly fucking obvious that this is exactly what Nick Fury was doing. If anyone in the audience could figure this out within a few seconds, then this super spy should have been able to figure it out as well.
Of course, is the unfortunate fact that I'm an idiot.
But don't worry, it gets worse. The scene moves over, and now we're at one of those abandoned nuclear sites in Russia. A couple of men are guarding a gate, and a black man approaches. He's told to wait there while we see the arrival of Daenerys Targaryen, I suppose. She tells the black guy to reveal his true form, and he shapeshifts into one of the Skrulls. Then they open the gate and allow him in. I want to point out that the Skrulls are supposed to be masters of shapeshifting, and yet for some reason this guy decided to take on the appearance of a black man in Moscow, Russia.
I watch and think, who is this moron?
Because he is a Skrull and there is some animosity towards aliens at this point in time on Earth, it is extremely important that he remain hidden and unnoticed by the human population. So he figured that the best way to do that was to appear as a black man in Moscow, Russia, where the population of black people is 0.03%.
We should point out at this moment it is a fairly terrible plan.
This stupid motherfucker could have walked around in his normal green alien form, and it probably would have been less noticeable than trying to be a black man in Moscow, Russia. The need for Disney to check off diversity boxes is fucking ridiculous. As they're driving over to the abandoned plant, Dany gives a line of dialogue that is proved not true within the next 10 seconds, because she says that all of the Skrulls in their safe area wear their normal skin, the green-looking alien skin, except that obviously isn't the case. Dany is still disguised as a human. Many of the other Skrulls that are in this safe zone are also being disguised as a human, and the random Russian black guy Skrull is also keeping his human form. So I don't know why they decided to include this line of dialogue when it's very obviously not true, and it was proven so within seconds of Dany saying it. I imagine that the reason why many of these Skrulls are still in their human form is a cost-cutting measure so they didn't have to constantly deal with CGI and prosthetics, but it still doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever for Dany to actually give that line of dialogue saying that they all use their normal Skrull form. After they arrive, Dany goes into a secure area and there's some kind of initiation going on where it shows a Skrull taking on the form of a very specific human, and then they use a machine to steal the human's memories and transfer them into the Skrull. However, for some unknown reason, they don't kill the human after this happens. You would have to think that it would probably be a better idea to get rid of that original human. The Skrull already has all of the memories and the shape of that human, so why would they need to keep the human alive? Maybe it will be explained at some point later on. Maybe they need to recharge the memory stealing or something. But as of right now, keeping those humans alive doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I can only imagine that it's happening so that certain key characters that will get taken later on are able to get rescued. Because realistically, every single one of them should have been taken out and dealt with after the memory stealing thing happened. Back with Nick Fury, he's watching the hidden camera that he had placed in Sonya's office, which again I want to point out is ridiculous that it would still be there undetected. Regardless, Sonya apparently doesn't want to work with any of the Skrulls, the good or the bad. She just wants to get rid of all of them and be done with the problem. She's going to send a couple of her agents to go meet with an important person, and they're going to find out about whatever plans the Skrulls are trying to do. Nick Fury and Talos are going to try to intercept these agents and go to the meeting themselves. Back at the abandoned plant, now we get to meet the leader of the bad Skrulls. His name is Gravik, and of course, he's being played by a black guy, because once again, it makes complete fucking sense for a Skrull to disguise himself as a black guy in Russia.
Besides, I wouldn't want somebody tracing my steps, pointing out all the mistakes I was making.
I'm pretty sure by the end of this series, there are going to be so many Skrulls disguising themselves as black people in Russia that Moscow is going to look like fucking Detroit.
You damn right, wise ass.
Gravik tells Danny that she has a mission to go into the city and she's going to deliver some stuff to a guy and then get a backpack with some devices in it in exchange. And by completely sheer coincidence, this is the exact same person that Nick Fury and Talos are supposed to be meeting. They all go to the city. Danny meets with the guy first, she does the exchange, and then she leaves. Nick Fury and Talos intercept Sonya's agents, and then they go and meet with the guy, but they're just a few minutes late and they don't see Danny as she's leaving. However, outside, Maria spots Danny, and for some unknown reason, she decides to follow her because apparently the script told her that she was supposed to do so. She calls up Nick and says that she's following a person of interest, but again, there is no rational reason why Maria would suddenly start following Danny other than the script said that it needed to happen. There was no way that she knew that Danny had met with the same contact that Nick Fury was going to go with. It was simply something that was a pure coincidence in the script. It's fucking ridiculous, and there's only one reason why this is happening, and it's extremely dumb and even more contrived once we get to that point.
I can't wait to see what next preposterous thing you're going to try.
When Nick Fury and Talos try to interrogate the guy about the nuclear weapon, it's quickly revealed that this guy they had been meeting with is actually one of the bad Skrulls, and he gets into a fight with Talos, but eventually Nick Fury is forced to shoot him. Talos is angry because he's trying to save his people, even the bad ones, and he doesn't want them to die, so he gets really pissed off at Nick Fury, and then Nick Fury leaves. Now, I want to bring your attention to something very important that we just saw in these last couple scenes. The Skrulls are extremely strong and durable. During the fight, we saw Talos get smashed right through a concrete pillar and then stand up a few seconds later as if it was nothing. He was also able to break metal chains with his bare hands. Suffice it to say that these Skrulls are extremely strong and could very easily kill a normal human. Even a single punch would likely be fatal. This makes the situation earlier in the episode with Watson even dumber, because not only did he have a weapon that he could have used against his pursuer, but he's also extremely strong and could have likely easily defeated most any human that had been chasing after him. But don't worry, it gets worse, because he also has super strength and super durability. Talos was able to get thrown through a concrete pillar and then stand up a few seconds later like it was nothing. And yet, we're supposed to believe that the Skrull playing Watson at the beginning of the episode somehow was completely mangled and died from a 30-foot fall off of a roof.
None of this makes any sense.
But believe it or not, the situation with Watson is going to get even dumber as we get further into the episode, because there's yet another thing that he could have done, but the script simply didn't allow him to because it's a contrived, stupid mess. Continuing, we see Maria chasing Danny into a tunnel system. Danny surprise attacks Maria and for some reason only disarms her and then runs away. Remember, Danny's a Skrull, super strength, could have killed Maria with no effort. But don't worry, it gets worse. Because after Maria is knocked to the ground, Talos appears out of fucking nowhere.
What?
Mere seconds ago, we had seen Talos in the building with Nick Fury, and he was sitting on the ground moping like a sad puppy because the other guy, the other Skrull, had been taken out by Nick Fury. But now, somehow, miraculously, Talos is suddenly next to Maria. There is no explanation on how he got here or how he possibly could have known that this was the location Maria was in, because as we were watching her follow Danny, she never communicated her location to Nick Fury or Talos. There was simply no way for Talos to know where she was or to have gotten there in time. But he just suddenly appears at this very moment because the story needed him to, and because this is where we discover that Danny is actually his daughter.
Nobody cares.
This is why Maria had to randomly follow Danny, because it needed to set up this contrived, idiotic situation where Talos is reunited with Danny, and we, the audience, learn that it's his daughter. Apparently, they haven't been talking for a very long time, and Danny didn't know that her mother, Talos' wife, had died. There's been some family problem, but we don't know exactly what that is. However, it seems like Danny wants to take more drastic measures for dealing with the humans, and Talos is looking for a more peaceful solution. Talos asks Danny to give him the bomb materials, but she refuses, and then he just lets her walk away with potentially a nuclear device, because fucking why not, I guess.
Best season ever!
When I first saw this, I thought, okay, maybe he planted some sort of tracking device on Danny that will lead them back to the location of Gravik and all of the other bad Skrulls, except that's not the case at all. Instead, Talos is just a fucking idiot and let Danny walk away with a nuclear weapon that her group plans to use on innocent people. Because Talos is a fucking moron. After this mission failure, we see Nick Fury going into some random bar, and a guy tells him that he's not the man he used to be. Which, I should point out, this line of dialogue seemingly comes out of nowhere, and this is the third time so far that Nick Fury has been told that he's no longer strong and he's weak, and he's not the man he used to be. The guy that says it in the bar doesn't even know Nick Fury. He just kind of says it, like, out of nowhere. I don't even know why this is included. It is bizarre. Regardless, Nick Fury buys himself a couple of drinks, and he also buys some for the strange man that had just told him that he was weak and pathetic. But don't worry, it gets worse, because Nick Fury gets a couple of drinks and then he goes over and sits down with Maria Hill. She asks him if he's making friends, and he says, "This is how we stopped the Cold War from going hot. It was spooks like me." Maria looks at him in astonishment and says, "You're not allowed to say that," to which Nick Fury responds, "You can't, but I can." He got, the N-word pass, basically. I'm willing to bet, however, that the vast majority of room temperature IQ Disney Marvel target audience don't actually know the meaning behind the word spook, because neither version, there are actually two different versions of that as a noun, have been used in quite a long time. The first version of the word spook is just a nickname for a secret spy. The second version is a derogatory racial slur used against black people. The funny thing about this ridiculous fucking scene is that the more common usage of the word spook was in reference to the secret spies, and it's also the more recent usage of the word. The last time the word spook was used as a racial slur was probably about 100 years ago. It is very unlikely that anyone living today has actually heard that word being used as a derogatory slur, whereas the word spook, as I mentioned, was used quite frequently in the 50s, 60s, and even the 70s as a reference to different kinds of agencies and secret spies and that sort of stuff. I'm not sure what's dumber about this situation, the fact that Maria is genuinely trying to pull the white liberal woman routine, or that the show is actually trying to make an excuse for why black people are able to use racial slurs to describe themselves, and it's only considered bad when someone else does it.
Definitely an N-word.
It is absurd that a black person would demand respect and yet at the same time refer to himself using racial slurs. Why should anyone else be expected to have respect for you when you have no respect for yourself? No other ethnicity in the world does this. No other group will refer to themselves with derogatory racial slurs and then suddenly get upset when another person does it.
Have I oppressed you? Have I oppressed your people somehow?
Regardless of the writer's intent, this entire scene was idiotic and absolutely did not need to be included. Regardless, you know how about a minute ago when some random guy in the bar told Nick Fury he was weak, pathetic, and that he wasn't the same man he used to be? Well, now it's Maria's turn, and she says all the same things. This is the fourth time that Nick Fury has been told this. She says that he's worthless and she can't count on him anymore to do the right thing. This is very clearly trying to completely tear down this character, because that's what they do with all of these strong male characters in the MCU, whether it's Thor or Loki or whoever. The MCU, the MSHU, has to tear down the male characters. In the next scene, we see an older woman getting into a taxi driven by a middle-aged woman, but moments later it's revealed that the passenger is actually Danny and the driver is Talos. Keep in mind that before the events of earlier in the episode, Danny and Talos had not seen each other for a very long time. It's implied it might even have been years. We're not giving any information on how these two were able to make contact with each other. Perhaps Danny still had a cell phone number for Talos or something to that effect. Regardless, the entire situation seems a bit contrived, which is a pattern for this show, and these two just end up meeting out of nowhere, and we're just supposed to accept it and continue on with it. We find out that the people that killed Danny's mother are the same ones that Danny is currently working with, but now she's willing to go behind their back in order to try to stop them and work with her father again. She tells Talos the details about the upcoming attack, which will involve 3 locations. Danny also says that she will mark the backpacks with an infrared spray in order to help better identify them. The following day, Nick Fury and the others are using thermal glasses, and sure enough, they can see the big glowing X's on the backpacks. Except this is not how thermal tracking works at all.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
Everything that generates heat would be glowing. That means the people, Danny, most of their clothing, surfaces that someone had recently rubbed up against, car exhaust, even the ambient temperature is going to cause things to glow, which means that the X's on the backpack would not even really be visible. They would be extremely difficult to actually detect because the backpacks themselves and the air around it would be warm enough to make it nearly indistinguishable. This is not how thermal works, even in the cold parts of Russia, I know. But the thing is, this is not how it would work at all, especially on a sunny day. It's ridiculous. There's any number of other things they could have used, some sort of infrared or anything. Whatever reason, the writers on this show decided to go with thermals. This is fucking dumb. That's not how it works. It's a bad idea. Danny passes off the backpacks, and Maria and Talos follow the individual people who picked them up. Nick Fury, however, starts following a strange person who has been watching him. This person repeatedly changes shape, from a girl to an old man to a woman. We see this Skrull is able to change shape not only within a second or so, but also completely change height and clothing, which brings up a really good question in regard to the first Skrull that we saw pretending to be Watson. Now we know that a Skrull can change not just appearance, but also height and size and clothing. So when Watson was being chased early in the episode, he had a gun he could have used, he had his super strength he could have used, and now we know that he could have used the shape-shifting to better easily avoid his pursuer. At any point during that pursuit, when he went into a crowd or into a building or was out of line of sight of his pursuer, he could have changed shape or done something in order to evade the pursuer. This Watson character at the beginning of the episode is dumber than a box of rocks. There are any number of things that the Watson Skrull could have done, and yet he didn't. And the sole reason for this was because the writers needed to have the big reveal when he fell off the building that he was actually a Skrull and he wasn't the original Watson. So they had to make that particular Skrull extremely fucking stupid in order for that contrived situation to actually work.
You don't have a better bad idea than this?
This is the best bad idea we have, sir.
Meanwhile, Maria and Talos are chasing down the backpacks only to discover that they're empty decoys. It's clear that Danny has double-crossed Talos. Suddenly, the real explosives are detonated, and the person Nick Fury was following turns out to be the leader of the bad Skrulls, Gravik. During the commotion, Maria Hill is confronted by Nick Fury, who shoots and kills her, only for it to be revealed that this was the Skrull version of Nick Fury, and it wasn't really him. The real one then arrives a few seconds later to try to come to the rescue, but it's too late and Maria is dead. This was supposed to be a massive twist of an ending, and several of the actors involved in the show, including the one that plays Maria herself, was very much surprised that this important twist ending was not leaked earlier. What this actress fails to understand is that nobody gives a shit about the Maria Hill character. She was barely anything more than wallpaper up until this point in the MCU. No one considers it to be a big twist when a very minor, inconsequential, unpopular character gets killed off. It barely even moves the needle.
You don't approve? Well, too bad.
Thus far, I'm not really certain what the purpose of this series is supposed to be, other than emasculating Nick Fury, that is. It has been, however, revealed by the showrunners that this series will have almost nothing to do with the original storyline from the comic book version of Secret Invasion, the only thing that it will have in common is the use of the shape-shifting scrolls. Other than that, the writers on this series are just kind of doing whatever. One thing I can say for sure about this series so far is that it is incredibly boring, and it looks like it's going to be yet another one of the Disney Plus failures to add on top of the pile. But thankfully, that's the end of episode 1.
I'm taking shots at the enemy. I'm gonna make it to the top, leave a legacy. If I got something to say, you better let me speak. Turn it up a new degree, bitch, you ain't seen anything. I pop off with the new rock, electronic, blow the sonic roof up.